Welcome back to the JLL coaching pod. Exercise selection is the chat that we're going to talk about today. And everyone gets excited about exercise selection because it is literally like you step foot in the gym and you've got to make the choice, what do I do and why do I do it? And the main emphasis of this pod is diving into slightly deeper thinking with regards to why do we choose XYZ exercises? Like, why are we doing a squat? Why are we doing a RDL? Why are we choosing these exercises? And not in terms of like, oh, I saw this exceptionally good looking person on Instagram do it, therefore if I do it, I will look like them. That's very like, you got your first base principles thinking. That's like the opposite. Last resort thinking. If that's how you make your exercise selection choices based off the Instagram algorithm of attractive people and nothing else, you're probably listening to the wrong pod. Shots fired to myself, but let's do more. Let's be better. And when you're thinking about exercise selection, like, it's quite a task if you actually stop and think about it for a second. You're like, in the gym, you could literally, or even in life, you're like, all right, I'm trying to improve my body, the performance outcome of my body, if that's what I'm in the gym for, not for the mental health benefits, all of this other stuff. But even you need to take that into consideration with regards to exercise selection. But say, I'm looking for a physical performance outcome. I'm in the gym. I've never seen anyone do any exercises before. How do I decide I want to get better? And then once you've made that decision, where do you go from there? Like, where do you even begin with this entire thought process of which exercise to choose? Because we've been told we should do squats, lunges, RDLs, bench press, and they're popular in our culture, in our society, but we've made those up. If you go look at Pakistan, for instance, they'll launch a ball up on their shoulders and stand up with it. And that's a form of strength training, of performance training. If you go look around the world, you'll go to these African tribes, and their kind of like social respect metrics are how high they can jump repeatedly. It's like you've got different physical performance outcomes wherever you look across the world. And in our culture, in England, in America, whatever, in a westernized culture, it's like we're looking for X, Y, Z. We want, if you've got a big squat, you are cool. You're cool. If you can bench press a lot of weight, you are someone I want to spend time with. Literally, you are. I love that. Love to hear it. But why? Like, why? How do you go about this? And there was a very, very famous paper in the sports science world talking about the constraints-based approach. And now, if physical performance is the main outcome, you got to think about what constrains you in this world. You can't go off to the moon. You can't change who you are really inherently with regards to DNA and genetics. But you do have a choice of a task. So you've got your physical performance. Say, I want to get better at football, or I want to get better at padel tennis. That's the physical performance outcome. Or I want to get stronger at the dumbbell bench press, or I want to build muscle. That is your task. The physical performance is kind of the outcome, but that's your task. That is a constraint. Once you have a bit of a constraint, you could call it a goal, but let's call it a task. Once you have that task, the idea of what you're trying to do to get that physical performance outcome, it leads you into the right direction. So first, what's the physical performance outcome that I'm looking for? And then we've got to figure out some constraints to start thinking about how we can choose which exercise we want to select. You've got the task. Could have been any of the ones I've just spoken about. And then you've got the organism. So you've got task. What are we doing? Where are we? That kind of stuff. The organism, the individual. So this is, for example, I want to get better at paddle tennis. The task is improve my ability to move quickly overhead with light loads. A smash down like that. That's the task. Physical performance is get better at padel, as they say. Break it down into all the tasks you can do and then work at one task at a time. The organism, the individual, is me. What are my constraints? For example, do I have good shoulder flexion? Can I even get my arm overhead? Not even thinking about force production, but can I just lift my arm over my head? Can I reach up overhead? Can I do it without pain? Can I move from abduction to adduction? Can I move my working arm for padel across my body? Is that even possible? And then, is it possible? Now you've got that range of motion. How competent is it? Am I conscious? Am I unconsciously incompetent at some areas of padel? Am I consciously incompetent? Am I working along this spectrum of competency? Am I unconsciously competent at the top, at the pinnacle? The thinking, all of that stuff needs to happen away from the sport. But that's the organism. You've got to think about all these individual constraints with the person in front of you. That's essential when deciding exercise selection. For example, someone wants to get better at squatting, but their femurs, relatively to the rest of their body, are the longest bones in the... Well, they already are the longest bone in the body, but they're the longest bones... It's the longest bone in the world. And relatively, the rest of their bones aren't as long. That's the organism. How can we adjust things around the organism to be competent at the task? Someone's got, AKA, we want to squat, we want good squat outcomes, but they've got very long femurs relative to the rest of their body, which you spoke about in the previous episode, how to get good at squatting. We can start to influence the environment if we give them a ramp under their feet to effectively make their tibia longer, so the ratios are a bit better. They can probably be more competent at squatting. So we've got the third aspect, the third constraint. We've got tasks, organisms, individual, and an environment. Now, environment is one that we can influence the most, per se, because that's kind of our job as coaches, as PTs, to work on the environment. We're in a gym. How can we help set them up to get these good physical performance outcomes? For example, me with padel, can I throw some balls at high velocity overhead? Can I do some chops to mimic that same action I've got in the sport, work on the same physical qualities to get those good physical performance outcomes when I'm on the padel court? Now, this is the constraints-based approach. So you think about the task constraints, the environment constraints, the individual constraints, and you make decisions based off that for exercise selection to help improve or move forward with a physical performance, a aspect of physical performance. And that is the kind of all of it. You can put all of exercise selection within that constraints model. And we'll dive into how later on throughout this podcast. Now, next big thing. When it comes to exercise selection, variability. So throughout the universe, if you take our Earth, for example, and look around, all the different plants, all the different animal species, there is huge variability. Now, if you think, why do we have that variability? Why does the universe create this variability? And I want you to think of chaos. I want you to think of monumental events, cataclysmic events that can end the world. If you've got a lot of variability throughout an environment, it is more likely that you will have some kind of difference across the species, that when some kind of cataclysmic event happens or occurs, some physical qualities will enable some species to survive versus others. Think cockroaches, alligators, they are indestructible, effectively. You need this variability in order to survive. That's a universal principle. Now, with training, with regards to task outcomes and variability, it's been shown. The famous example is variability within a task. A good quality outcome is measured in a variety of ways. Let's say you're a blacksmith. Blacksmith, is that what they're called? I'm pretty sure it's a blacksmith. Excuse my slow brain. But the people who hit swords with a hammer and change the metal. It's been shown that the good outcome is a good clean sword. Say we're making swords or Japanese knives. Let's say Japanese knives because I love a Japanese blade. We're creating Japanese blades and we are just banging steel together. The best in the world will have this amazing level of accuracy with each hit of the hammer on the blade. They will target it perfectly. But you would kind of, the assumption would be each time you hit the hammer, the plane of motion or the range of motion or the path that the hammer takes would be almost identical. But the reality is there is huge variability of the direction of the hammer, but it will always land very accurately. And in sports, you need this variability. A good team can win under a certain set of conditions. The weather's good, everyone's getting along in the team, things are going swimmingly, the other team's not as competent as you can win. But a great team will win against all the odds. The weather's poor, the team that showed up are just absolutely on fire, everything's working for them. A great team will win against all odds. That's the difference. You've got these key players in these teams that win against all odds who can make it happen when it needs to happen under the highest levels of pressure. The Euros are on at the moment, football Euros. And Bellingham is a great example of this. The last minute of extra time, he scores a beautiful overhead kick against Slovakia. And that is just like a key example of this variability that a sports team needs to have in moments of pressure in order to be great. And same thing in the gym. So you can squat up and down and you want the outcome to be stronger quads, stronger glutes, stronger hip musculature, and you want to do that competently over time to get these good outcomes, these good performance outcomes, etc., etc. It's a great way to get stronger, build bone density, become a better motor control human being. But not every squat will look the same. It's impossible for every squat to look the same. You're going to have a variability within each and every squat. Every single squat will look slightly different. And the best athletes will be able to perform well under a huge variety of squats. Can you squat in a goblet squat? Even within the same set, every single rep will be slightly different. And the more competent you get at squatting, the greater variability you'll have and still get positive outcomes. So variability is huge. This is why you don't need to do a gazillion exercises. This is why you can do 1 or 2 or 3 exercises per movement pattern and get phenomenal outcomes. Because you already inherently have so much variability within each exercise, so you don't need to keep mixing it up. It triggers me when people are like always doing a brand new exercise. It's not the end of the world, right? But you need to get competent at these movement patterns. You need to be able to kind of display a high level of competency, that being whatever exercise you've chosen. You need to get the physical outcomes that you're looking for with that choice of exercise. For example, with the squat, you want to get stronger quads. With padel, you want to do chopping exercises to work on your ability to rotate at high velocities. How do we measure the outcomes? Are you producing more power? Are you moving? You can use a VBT monitor, velocity-based training monitor, to kind of track your velocity over time. Are you able to get faster with higher loads, etc., etc.? Faster with the same loads as well, whatever. Super important. So you need your KPIs, you need to see what your key performance indicators are for each individual aspect of training, and you can go from there. Variability. Bosh. So far, we're talking about exercise selection. Constraints-based approach. You've got your task, individual, environment, and you need to monitor your physical performance outcomes from those constraints. And you can adjust those constraints as you move forward. Variability, that's throughout nature. You don't need to always be switching up exercises massively. There's probably a lot of negative consequences or trade-offs due to that. So, now we will continue on. Jacksonian dissolution. Who has heard of this? Probably not too many of us. This is from a famous neuroscientist called something Jackson, probably Dr. Jackson. And he figured out in the 1900s that when you apply stress to a living thing, that living thing will regress back with regards to its systems in a logical, evolutionary fashion. So, for example, we have parts of our system as a human being that are more evolved than others. Our aerobic system is more complex and therefore more evolved than our anaerobic phosphogenesis system. There are significantly more aspects of the Krebs cycle than phosphogen energy system. There are a lot more complexities in this aerobic system than in this anaerobic system. As we become more stressed when we are using this cardiovascular system, we step away from the aerobic system and go towards this pre-evolved, this earlier system that we have evolved, the anaerobic system. The same thing happens in the brain. This is what Jacksonian found. So the further out the tissues in the brain, the more evolved they are. So just think you got the center in the middle of the brain, and people call that the reptilian aspect of the brain. That is your oldest aspect of the brain. As you go out, you get more modern, you've got consciousness. The outer aspects of the brain are kind of like what make us human. And being human kind of the beautiful way to think about it is the decisions we make that are hard and challenging to do, but the right thing to do. For example, not cheating on your partner because you want to have a long-term relationship with them rather than just this short-term pleasure pursuit, is a decision that humans are capable of because we have this more evolved brain system. Now, again, same principles apply. If you add stress to the system, you're drunk, that's alcohol, that's stress. You've got loads of work chaos. You've got a million things happening in your life that creates more stress. Your ability to make high quality, human, highly evolved decisions become worse because your systems are more stressed and you have to take a step back on the evolutionary ladder, and we make worse decisions. We get dumber. We rely on our pre-evolved, our earlier evolved systems. This is just gorgeous. So in the gym, when you see someone who's older, you might often see them scrunched over like this. They might be terrible at rotating. They might be terrible in that transverse plane at producing any kind of force or managing any kind of force. But if you see someone young in their prime, top level athlete, they're amazing at this transverse plane, at walking, at propelling themselves forward. They are very competent across all planes of motion, all velocities, etc., etc. If we add stress to the system over time, they get less competent in the transverse plane, less competent in the frontal plane, and they go back to rely on these kind of less complex systems, these less complex modes of transport. Comparing a human to an ape, apes walk in this frontal plane, side to side kind of motion. You can see the camera, you can see me doing this. Whereas humans, we are competent in the transverse plane, we are more efficient with walking, and we are more evolved. You've got to be able to move up and down the evolutionary ladder. Jacksonian disillusion. Bosch. Again, talked about this evolutionary ladder. I've kind of set us up here for an entire talk on exercise selection. That will be the key principles. The next episode that I put out will be applying these principles to exercise selection. We're going to talk about 7 pillars, probably over a few episodes, being movement quality, which is going to be like the shape of your body. The pattern you are in, the movement pattern. Is it knee dominant, hip dominant, vertical/horizontal, pushing and pulling? What are we looking at here? The stance. Are you bilateral symmetrical? Are you asymmetrical front to back or asymmetrical lateral? And the plane of motion. Are you sagittal, frontal, transverse? This is the kind of thing we will talk about in the next episode. As well as movement quality, we will talk about movement quantity. And again, that's kind of putting a number to what we are doing in the gym and how we are choosing it. So movement quantity is thinking about load, duration, and velocity, and that's going to come next. Movement quantity and movement quality are the 2 things I'll cover in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you got some value. Hope you got some interesting things to think about rather than just looking at Instagram and making your exercise choices based off that. Think deeper. Trying to get some good answers. Okay. Have a good day. Thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate your time. Goodbye.